to the Writer Groupie podcast. I'm Kim Smith, the writing guru, bringing you discussions, insights, and insider details on planning, producing, promoting, and profiting as a writer. This is a podcast by writers for writers. You can find out more about Writer Groupie at www.writergroupie.net. And here's the next episode of Writer Groupie. And welcome to episode 81 in this Talking Heads segment. And we're kind of talking today about, well, how you get prepared to write and what kinds of difficulties you might face when you get ready to write. And even once you get started writing, the difficulties that might be facing you. And some people might consider this to be writer's block, but I don't think it's writer's block. I think it's an internal editor. What do you think, Bill?
Well, a person has to get their head in the right location. You got to get their mindset. You have to collect your thoughts together and decide, where am I at and where do I want this to go? And once you've got that decided, your next step is to figure, how do I get from A to B?
Well, my problem is not the decision, where I want to go and how to get from A to B. My problem is actually getting started into the story and not criticizing everything that comes out of my fingertips. I have an internal editor that says, oh, well, that's not going to go anywhere. Or, oh, you're writing yourself into a corner. Or, oh, nobody's ever going to read that. That person is just silly. Nobody would like that. I mean, I have these thoughts in my head that says, no, that's not good enough. So how do you do that? I mean, what do you do to overcome an internal editor?
But what you're telling yourself is it needs to be perfect coming off your fingertips, and that's not true. You have first edits, you have mid edits, you have your final edits. Isn't that where you should go and polish up your story to fix a hole that maybe you've left in a character, or a hole that's in the story itself, where you can take an imperfect character and make them just, more believable, more everyday?
True. That's true. That's very true. You can write imperfect characters, and you can write stories that have plot holes, and they probably will be fixed on a subsequent edit. But I don't know about everybody else. I can only speak for myself. But once I became a published author and knew that everything that I wrote would be most likely for publication, for public consumption, I began becoming a whole lot more critical of whatever I wrote, whether it was first draft or not. It has a thing it has to pass. It has like a check that it has to pass from me. I am like the first line of defense for this story, and it's like, if it doesn't pass muster with me, it's never going to make it to the first edit. And this is a problem. This is a serious problem that I hope that I'm the only one that has this problem. But if I'm not, and you happen to be an author who is faced with this sort of difficulty when you are starting, a new story or whatever, leave us a comment, because I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about how you're handling it. Personally, I believe that I'm having enough difficulties getting into a new story that it delays me from getting the work done to the point where, it's years between books.
You think maybe you're being a little bit too critical of yourself? Just because the story has not gone perfectly off your fingers, that you feel that it can't be improved, that it has to be perfect to start with? That's what edits are for.
Well, that's true. And, and I've thought about that, and I've really mentally slapped myself and said, let it go. Just let it go. Just let the story come out. Let it be what it is. Write it the way you see it or feel it. And then let an editor tell you where you fall short, or where, you didn't get the job done, basically. And some days I can do that. But there are some days that in my writing prep, it takes me 30 minutes just to get ready to sit down at my processor. For me to sit down and open my work in process, my WIP as it's known, I have to have my coffee. I have to have my research materials. I have to have stuff open on my computer. I have to have it just so before I even begin. And I think that is part of the problem with this writing prep / writer's block, is that used to be I could sit down, didn't matter, get out of the bed, grab a cup of coffee, sit down at the computer and just go at it for 30 or 45 minutes, jump in the shower, get ready for work. Whatever had to be done after that took place. It was no big deal. And now it's like, I feel like my own expectations of my writing and my performance are so much greater than they were back in the day. It used to be I could sit down and I could just write this silly little short story, and whether I ever did anything with it or not just didn't matter. Now everything matters. It matters so much that I don't get a lot of writing done because my inner critic won't shut up long enough.
Well, you think maybe it's better to go back, it sounds like your early days where you let the story flow of itself. Let it come out of you, let it reach the keys, let it speak to itself. And now you've gotten so close to the story, so close to the character, you become critical to the point you're becoming overcritical.
I agree. I believe that is quite possible, and that could be totally what I'm doing. But how do you stop? How do you not do that? How do you get back to that point where you can just go straight to the word processor, sit down, start typing, and not care?
That's how you let the story flow from you. Let it flow freely. I mean, if you're going to critique every letter you type, you're too busy thinking about what you're doing. You're not letting the story happen and evolve in and of itself. Let the characters become the bulk of the story, not the author writing that story becoming the story. You've got your ideas. You know where you are. You know roughly where you want to be, and a ballpark of how you want to get there. But if you're going to overthink everything and be overcritical of what you're doing as you're going along, you're not going to let the story happen. You're too busy damming up the story inside your mind of, well, this has got to be from here to here. This has got to be just so. Well, it doesn't have to be just so. If it's coming off out of your head, through your fingers, and onto the screen, let the story happen. Let it flow and let it go where it goes, and then steer where you have to steer.
And what's really interesting to me is that there have been stories that I have written that have just flowed like water. Never had a minute of doubt or worry because, and I don't know whether it has to do with the, oh well, if this doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't go anywhere kind of attitude. And now I feel like everything should go somewhere. I care a lot about, whether I'm writing good stuff now. And I'm not to say that I didn't care in the past. I did a great deal. But it was like, I felt like it was good enough. And now, I don't know that I feel like it's good enough. Now, it's more like, okay, maybe it's good enough for a first edit. Or maybe it's good enough to get it to an editor to help me make it into the better story that it could be. But nevertheless, those days when stories just flew from the fingertips onto the page, and they, you got an emotional response from yourself, where if it was a funny part, you laughed out loud, and if it was a sad part, you had tears in your eyes as you were typing. Those kinds of days are just farther and fewer between. And I almost want to say it's because there's so much competition out there now. You really have to care that you're doing all that you can to provide the best story that you can because the market is so tight out there. And this is really for published authors. This is for authors who are writing for publication. There's so much competition out there that if you're not writing the very best story that you can muster, you're probably not going to have much of a readership. And that bothers me to the point where I'm not even sure if I want to keep writing anymore.
But when you're writing, aren't you supposed to be writing to satisfy yourself? Which is what you did earlier days. You wrote because the story was in you. Let it flow. Let the story come. Let the author be the author in this story. And now as you've progressed, you aren't trying to satisfy the author. You're now trying to satisfy a public who is going to read your work, and then they're going to move on to the next author. They're not going to sit and harp so much on your story. Well, there was a hole here that could have been. They're going to read your story. They're going to move. if you go back to satisfying the author that's writing this story, that's the one that needs to be happiest. Because if the author is happiest, the story will probably flow the best, and the reader will probably enjoy that story more than one you had to sit and bang out inside your head before you could ever bang out on a keyboard.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. And that sounds wonderful, because if I could find my happy spot, and when I sit down to write, just keep telling myself it doesn't matter whether it's good or not. What difference does it make if anybody ever reads it? Just write to please yourself. If I could get to that point, I think I would be a lot freer with what I write and how often I write and how much I write. But I think that I have really limited myself, mentally especially, on, are you doing everything you can to turn out the best work that you can? I don't know that when you're an aspiring author and you haven't published anything, and maybe you're just in the process of trying to expand your horizons and, open your wings and fly as a writer, maybe you can take more chances. But once you've published and you're a published author and you have a followership, a readership, you're held to a higher standard. I just feel that way. Maybe I'm wrong. I would love to hear from our fans. Y'all tell me, am I wrong? Am I supposed to be held to a higher standard now that I'm a published author than I used to be? Does a first draft matter? Does anybody care? Because nobody's going to read my first draft. Is it okay to write crap on your first draft?
Yes, that's what edits are about. The edits are reading over what you've done and then try to fix it. But you have to be careful. You don't want to spend your editing time moving words on the paper. You want to spend your editing time improving the story that you initially put down in your draft. You want to dress up a hole. You want to expunge some on a character. Make the character more enjoyable, more lifelike, more real. Don't make them, because initially in your draft, it's liable to be improbable. The guy is not going to be the superhero. Make them down to earth. And when you initially write them in your draft, you're going to write them thinly. You're not going to describe every hair in their mustache and how they carry themselves. In your initial draft, you're going to simply mention he moved from the doorway to the desk. You're not going to go deeply into how the air swirled around him when he moved. That's what your edits are for. Write your story first, write your draft, get it from this point to this point, then go in and mention how his coat spun in the breeze when he turned on his heels. Expunge upon it and make it glow, make it come out and stand. But first, just get your idea on the paper first while the story is wanting to run, while you've got the thoughts in your head of where you want to go. And then grow the story later in your edits.
Well, that's fine advice to me, Bill. I'm telling you, I think I need to hear that every day. That you need to just don't worry about that first draft. Just get the story down, because I'm actually stopping story flow to the point where I'm not getting finished writing anything. And I really believe that inner critic is the reason. I really, truly do. And if I could shut up the inner critic, I think I could get a whole book written, and then maybe there would be something for an editor to edit. Right now, there's not.
Get it down first. Get the thoughts, get the story. Like I said, you know where you want to start, you know where you are, and you know where you want to end. Get the story there. Then go in and add substances to the story. Make it grow. Pull the reader into the story. If you're too busy being too heavy of a critic on yourself, you're going to ask yourself, do I really want to go here? Let the story happen. Let it flow, and then say, okay, I can move this into the story. I can fix this. I can dress this up some. But let the story happen, because if you're going to overthink, you're going to over-criticize the story, then you're going to start criticizing yourself. Then you're going to get yourself frustrated because this is not a top-end classic work here. Well, this is not the best that's ever been written. So why should I just keep going? Because this is not what I want. When your readers are going to read the story, they're going to love the story. They're going to love the characters. They're going to love where you put them and where you put their head and where you put their heart. That's what the reader is after. They're not going to read the story and say, this is a classic. This is the best story ever written. They may, but don't expect them to. Make them first read the story and say, I love that story. Now I can't wait for the next one. Is this one of a series? Is this the end of this book? I can't wait for this author to come out now with the next story to see where they take me.
Good advice. Good advice. Well, you guys, I hope that you're paying attention and listening, because I know I sure am. And this has been a great episode. We've had a lot of good conversation here about writing and blocking ourselves from writing, although it's not necessarily a writer's block episode. And I hope the next time we have a Talking Heads episode, we can get into a little bit more about research and how writing research can affect you from a lot of story wandering. If you do some good in-depth research, you won't have to fumble around so much. It'll help you stay on track with your writing. This has been episode 81, Talking Heads, and I'm so thankful you came to listen to us today. And I hope that you will go out and like, share, and subscribe. This episode will be on YouTube, iTunes, Tumblr, Triber, Twitter, and Facebook, as well as on our website at writergroupie.net. Until next time, this is us signing out.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Today's episode is brought to you by A Private Practice by E.J. Linden. And the description is: someone is murdering men around the city of Pittsburgh. The victims have one thing in common. They've all been identified as perpetrators of domestic violence. Detectives Susan Wyckoff and Frank Dillard are on the case. Their only clue? The letter carved into the bloodied palms of each of the victims. A Private Practice by E.J. Linden is available for Kindle on Amazon. This episode is brought to you by E.J. Linden, the author of A Private Practice. And the product description reads: someone is murdering men around the city of Pittsburgh. The victims have one thing in common. They've all been identified as perpetrators of domestic violence. Detectives Susan Wyckoff and Frank Dillard are on the case. Their only clue? The letter carved into the bloodied palms of each of the victims. E.J. Linden is a writer of mystery and suspense, words that also define the author. A Private Practice is E.J.'s debut novel featuring Detective Susan Wyckoff. E.J. lives to write. When not writing, E.J. enjoys pizza and beer with friends, watching pro football, and long walks in the park. Okay, that last part isn't quite true. Watch for more to come from E.J. Linden. Available for Kindle on Amazon.
Infinity Author Services for your author services needs. We create professionally designed book covers as well as provide editing, promotions, update your social media accounts, and WordPress site. Let Infinity Author Services increase the exposure of your novels with our exciting promo packages. You can find out more at infinityauthors.com. Infinity Author Services for the indie author in you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Writer Groupie. For booking information, show notes, and more, visit writergroupie.net.